2020 we bought MiG down in Alameda. My daughter Emily Ann and I decided to drive down and pick it up before we had even seen it. I did have my friend Richard have a look at it and see what he thought, and he thought it was definitely worth the time. When we got there, the boat was better than I had hoped for. It had a lot of work that needed to be done, but I was up for the challenge, and my girl was there with me to help me out. Emily Ann has always been my sailor girl. I was so happy that she came with me to help me move the boat up to Anacortes. She loved the little aft cabin, and that first night we ate our first meal on MiG. We made some sandwiches. It was pretty fun. The next day she got up early and started cleaning the boat. I didn't even ask her to do it. She just decided that it was a good thing that needed to be done. And true to form, she scrubbed and scrubbed, and boy, what a difference it made on the boat. Little MiG started to take shape, and I got more and more excited about sailing it around the world. Emily Ann continued to work on the boat until it was almost like new. I couldn't believe that it could actually look like that. We pulled out the sails and checked all of the sail covers and made sure that the sails were in good shape, and they were almost like new. I really liked the tan bark sails. That was pretty fun to have a boat with tan bark sails. My wife doesn't like that, but I've always thought that they look very salty. The former owner had painted all of the teak except for the handrails. He had painted them this ugly gray, which would later on become my nemesis, trying to scrub all that teak off and sand it off and then redo it. Emily Ann always looks like she's about ready to go out and hit the ocean. We decided to go and provision the boat before we did anything else so that we wouldn't have to try and eat out. This was still at the height of the pandemic. Everything in California was closed. So we went to Walmart and stocked up on a lot of food, not just for while we were in Alameda, but also for our voyage, which we anticipated was going to be about 20 days offshore to sail it out towards Hawaii and then north. Emily Ann decided that it was time to go up the mast and check all of the rigging. I pulled her up onto the top of the rigging. She's easy to pull up to the top, and she's been going to the top of the mast since she was 8 years old. She loves to do it. A guy came by on the dock and looked up and said to me, "Hey, good job sending your son up there." And she yelled at him, "I'm not his son, I'm his daughter." And then the man had the gall to look at me and say, "How dare you send your daughter up there? Why didn't you go up?" And then Emily Ann really gave him a mouthful. She said, "A minute ago you were fine that he was sending his son up here, but now that you find out I'm a girl, you freak out. I'm going up the mast because not only am I the best choice, I'm also a rigger. I've done this before." The next morning we woke up, and the sky was orange from the fires. This was when all of the fires were burning around San Francisco, and it was making national news. At 10 o'clock in the morning, it still looked like it was just early morning. We couldn't believe it. We went out and went on the dock and looked around, and everybody had their cell phones pointed to the sky. Now we know what'll happen if the apocalypse really does come. The glow of the orange in the boat was surreal. I really couldn't understand what was happening. I've never experienced anything like it. These pictures, they have no filter. This is actually what it looked like when we were walking around that morning. This is a famous photo that was taken at that time and was on the national news. It was taken the same day. So then that day we went out and we went to a local place to find a new fuel tank for the boat, because the fuel tank was leaking diesel. All the diesel was pooling into the bilge. We managed to find this perfect diesel tank for $90, and it fit in the cockpit. So the next step was to drain all of the nasty old diesel out of the tank, filter it, and put it into the new tank, and then run all of the fuel hoses and whatnot so that we could use this tank as our main tank. We were lucky to find a local guy who also lived on his boat who had a fuel polisher, and he came by and I paid him to polish all the fuel from the tank. He pulled it all out of there, and it was nasty looking stuff. Boy, I tell you, I can't believe that when I originally arrived I thought that I could just sail with that thing the way it was. He managed to save most of the fuel. There was quite a bit of it that had to be disposed of, but this is a picture of what was in the bottom of the tank. We spent most of that day getting the fuel system all set up, drilling new holes in the cockpit for the fuel line and stuff like that that you love to do when you have a new boat. Then I changed all of the filters, and we built a little platform over the fuel tank in the cockpit so that we could fill it while we were underway using the jerry jugs. I checked all of the belts and changed the oil in the engine and got it ready for offshore. We had only been there a couple of days and we were still already getting ready to go offshore on this little boat. I didn't do a survey on this boat. I didn't pay for one because I've spent enough time on boats. I figured I could find what needed to be found and fix it myself, save myself a little bit of money. And in retrospect, it was probably the right choice, even though what happened later was pretty severe and serious, and it would have been found had I done a survey. I wasn't actually concerned about a survey because I had every intention of basically rebuilding the boat when I got it back to Anacortes. And I figured, well, anything they find, I'm going to fix it anyway. So I made that choice, and maybe it bit me in the butt. Since we had provisioned before, we were basically ready to go the next day, and we had a pretty good weather window to head north. So we left. We pulled out of our slip and headed out for the bay, and we had planned it so that we would arrive at the Golden Gate at slack tide. I was definitely feeling a little green as far as sailing goes, since it had been a few years that I hadn't been on a boat. So as we pulled out of our slip, it was a little bit challenging with a new boat, little boat with a tiller, but I did it. I felt much better after we got out into the channel and headed towards the bay. This would be our first time sailing in San Francisco Bay. We hoisted the mainsail. There wasn't enough wind to sail, but we sure had fun raising the sails and checking everything out and seeing that it all worked. And as we went under the first bridge, it started to fog up, which is just like a Jack London novel. I love the story of the Snark. And as we approached the Golden Gate Bridge, I couldn't help but think of Jack London setting off for Hawaii on the Snark with it sinking under him. I should have known that I shouldn't even think about something like that when I'm heading offshore. And sure enough, Emily Ann came up to me that evening and told me that on her watch she had to pump the bilge. I was a little bit surprised, but not shocked. And I checked, and I saw under the engine that the water was coming from aft. So I figured, oh, it's just the packing gland. Not a big deal. We'll take care of it in the morning. Well, in the morning, I looked, and I said, oh shit. And Emily immediately said, it's a dripless packing gland, isn't it, Dad? And I said, yeah, it sure is, and it's leaking like crazy. Turned out that it had actual crack in the packing, or in the unit itself. You can see the crack right there. And there was no way to stop the water from coming into the boat. So we pumped it out with the bilge until the bilge pump stopped. Does this sound familiar? Sure enough, the same thing that happened on Wandering Dolphin happened to me again, and the bilge pump, the manual gulper bilge pump, had a split in the diaphragm. You'd think I would have checked that, right? Well, now we had to call the Coast Guard, and they towed us into Little Bodega Bay. That was a great experience, actually. The new owners of Wandering Dolphin are my friend Richard Cave and Shanoa and their kids. And Richard offered to drive up, hours of driving, by the way, to help me sort out the issues with the packing gland in Bodega Bay. He came up and we had a great time visiting with them and crawling up and trying to fix the bilge pumps, which we ended up fixing both the electric bilge pump, which wasn't working either, and the manual bilge pump. And Richard and the kids and Shanoa crawled all over the boat, and Richard determined that, well, we really can't fix this after all because of the crack in it. But he did manage to get it to stop leaking while we were sitting still, at least. And that was a relief because we were getting a little tired of pumping out the boat constantly. Well, then we had the choice of, do we want to sail north to Eureka, which was the nearest boatyard to the north, or do we want to sail back to Sausalito and haul the boat there? I decided that even though it was twice as far, we would go on and head out towards Eureka. So Emily and I headed out there. At least we had bilge pumps. There was no wind at all, so we motored. And you all know how I love to motor. It was fun. There were whales constantly. It's something we didn't see very often on the East Coast, but we saw a lot of whales on this trip. And in about 2 days, we arrived in Eureka, where we would haul the boat. And it would have to wait for me to get a trailer built for it, and then I would come down and pick it up and take it home to Anacortes for its refit. Together